Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud while stoned. Today, we're going to start part 3 of Little Blue Book number 69, titled Life of Mary, Queen of Scots, written by Alexander Dumas. And this will be the final part for this book. And we left off at the top of page 40. And I'm going to go back just a paragraph, more for me than for you, because you can just, Okay, here we go. Hold on. Turning the page seems to be tough. This book is completely falling apart. Every page is almost completely torn out. They're all hanging on by the bottom staple. Okay, page 40. Oops, it's not the right page. There we go. All right, here we go. Madam, said the Earl of Kent, pointing to the New Testament, this book by which you have sworn is not genuine, since it is the Papist version. Consequently, your oath cannot be considered as any more genuine than the book on which it has been taken. My lord, answered Mary Stuart, what you say may benefit you, but not me, who well know that this book is the true and faithful version of the word of the Lord. Madam, replied Earl of Kent, your grace stopped at what you were taught in your youth, without inquiry as to whether it was good or bad. It is not surprising, then, that you have remained in your error, for want of having heard anyone who could make known to you the truth. That is why, as your grace has put a few hours longer to remain in this world, has but a few hours longer to remain in this world, and consequently no time to lose. With your permission, we shall send for the Dean of Peterborough. The most learned man there is on the subject of religion, who will prepare you for salvation, which you risk to our great grief and that of our Christian queen. By all your papist follies and abominations, which keep Catholics away from a knowledge of the truth. You mistake, my lord, replied Mary Stuart, if you have believed that I have grown up careless in the faith of my fathers, and without seriously occupying myself with a matter so important as religion. I have, on the contrary, spent my life with learned and wise men who taught me what one must learn on this subject, and I have enlightened myself by reading their works, never having doubted in my lifetime. Doubt is not likely to seize me in my death hour. And there is the Earl of Shrewsbury, here present, who will tell you that since my arrival in England I have, for an entire Lent, of which I repent, heard your wisest clergymen, without their arguments making any impression on my mind. It will be useless, then, my lord, to summon to one so firm as I, the Dean of Peterborough. The only thing I ask, my lord, is that you will send me my almoner, A-L-M-O-N-E-R. I think it may be French. It stands for priest. So we're just going to say that. My priest, whom you keep shut up in this house, to console me and prepare me for death. Or, in his stead, another priest from a poor village, I being no harder to please than God, and not asking that he have knowledge, provided that he has faith. It is with regret, madam, replied the Earl of Kent, that I find myself obliged to refuse your request. But it would be contrary to our religion, and we should be sinful in doing it. This is why we again offer you the venerable Dean of Peterborough, assured that your grace will find more consolation in him than in any bishop, priest, or vicar of the Catholic faith. Thank you, my lord, said Mary, But I have nothing to do with him, and as my conscience is free of the crime for which I am about to die, with God's help, martyrdom will take the place of confession for me." She thinks highly of herself. Mary arose, and bowing to the earls, indicated that she wished to be left alone. Then, as they prepared to leave, she asked, "At what hour shall I make ready to die?" "At 8 o'clock tomorrow, madam," answered the Earl of Shrewsbury. "It is well," said Mary. "But have you not some reply to make to me from Elizabeth, relative to a letter which I wrote her about a month ago?" "And of what did this letter treat, madame?" inquired the Earl of Kent. "Of my burial and funeral ceremony, my lord. I asked to be interred in France, in the Cathedral of Rheims, near the late Queen, my mother." "That may not be, madam," replied the Earl of Kent. "The Queen of England will provide for all the details." Then the Earl of Shrewsbury, turning to Sir Amos Paulet, said, "Sir Amos, we leave this lady to your keeping." With these words, the lords and their company left, leaving Mary Stuart alone with her servants. When they were gone, she turned to Jeanine Kennedy and said, "Well, Jeanine, have I not always told you, and was I not right, that at the bottom of their hearts they wanted to do this? And did I not see through all their procedure, the end they had in view, that I was too great a menace to their false religion to be allowed to live? Come, hasten supper now, that I may put my affairs in order." Then, seeing that instead of obeying her, the servants were weeping, she said, "My children, it is no time for weeping. Quite the contrary. For if you love me, you should rejoice that God, in having me die for his cause, relieves me from the torment I have endured for years. As for me, I thank him for allowing me to die for the glory of his faith in his church. Let us have patience, then, and while the men prepare supper, we women will pray to God." The men immediately left, while Mary Stuart and her women fell upon their knees. When they had recited some prayers, Mary arose, and sending for all the money in her possession, she divided it into portions for distribution among her friends. Then, supper being served, she seated herself at a table with her ladies, her doctor waiting upon her as had been his custom since her steward had been taken away from her. She ate as usual, speaking during the repast of the Earl of Kent, and of the way he had betrayed himself in respect to Mary's religious belief being her real offense, especially by his insisting on her having a Protestant minister instead of a Catholic priest. "Happily," she said, smiling, one more skillful than he was indeed in charge, was needed to change my faith. Okay. Meanwhile, back of Mary, Bourgogne was silently weeping, as he thought of his serving her for the last time. When the meal was over, Mary sent for all her servants. Then, before the table was cleared, she poured a glass of wine, rose, and drank to their health, asking all to drink to her salvation. Then she had a glass of wine given to each one. All kneeled down, and says the historic account from which we borrow these details, drank, mingling their tears with the wine, and asking pardon from the Queen for any wrongs they had done her. She granted it heartily, and in return asked them to do as much for her. Then, having made a discourse in which she told them of their duties to God, and exhorted them to remain steadfast in the Catholic faith, she begged them, after her death, to live together in harmony and charity, forgetting all the petty quarrels and disputes they had had among one another in the past. This speech ended, Mary arose from the table and expressed a desire to go to her wardrobe room to gather the clothes and jewels she wished to dispose of. But Bourgogne observed that it would be better to have these things brought into her chamber, that there would be a double advantage to this. She would be less fatigued, and the English would not see her. This last reason decided her, and while the servants were eating, she had brought into her anteroom first all her robes, then her jewels, all of which she disposed of among her friends. To everyone present she gave some token. This done, and being deprived of the presence of her confessor, she wrote him this letter. I have been tormented all this day on account of my religion, and urged to receive the consolations of a heretic. You will learn through Bourgogne and others that everything they could say on this matter has been useless, that I have faithfully made profession of the faith in which I wish to die. I requested that you should be allowed to receive my confession and to give me the sacrament, which has been cruelly refused, as well as the removal of my body and the power to make my will freely, so that I cannot write anything except through their hands and with the good pleasure of their mistress. For want to seeing you, I confess to you my sins in general, as I should have done in particular, begging you, in God's name, to watch and pray this night with me for the remission of my sins, and to send me your absolution and forgiveness for all the wrongs I have done. I shall try to see you in their presence, and if it is allowed, before all, and on my knees, I shall ask your blessing. Send me the best prayers you know for this night and for tomorrow morning, for the time is short, and I have not the leisure to write. But be calm. I shall recommend you like the rest of my servants, and your benefices. Supposed to be benefices, I think. Whatever you're benefiting. Above all will be secured to you. Farewell, for I have not much more time. Send to me in writing everything you can find best for my salvation, in prayers and exaltations. I send you my last ring. When Mary Stuart had finished this letter, she undertook to make her will, and with her pen, running rapidly, covered 2 large sheets in which no one was forgotten, present or absent, distributing the little she had with scrupulous fairness. Her will finished, Mary wrote a last letter to the King of France. At daybreak the next morning, reflecting that she had but a couple of hours to live, Mary arose and began dressing. She had all her handkerchiefs brought, and selected one of delicate cambric embroidered in gold with which to bandage her eyes. Her toilet completed, she went to her anteroom, where there was an altar set up. Kneeling on the steps, surrounded by her attendants, she began the communion prayers, and when they were ended, drawing from a gold box a host consecrated by Pope Pius V, which she had preserved for the day of her death. She asked Bourgogne to take it and perform the act of a priest, and in this manner she received the sacrament. Scarcely had she done this when the Earls of Kent and Shrewsbury were announced, but as the Queen had not finished her prayers, they were asked to wait a few minutes. About 8 o'clock, they entered the room, accompanied by guards. Then the sheriff, Sir Thomas Andrews, entered, a white wand in his hand. "Madam," he said to Mary Stuart, "the earls have sent me to you." At these words the Queen said, "Let us go," and made ready to follow him. They moved on to the great hall, Mary Stuart leaning on 2 of Sir Amias Paulet's attendants, followed by the earls and lords, the sheriff walking before her. Her dress, carefully chosen, consisted of a coif of fine cambric trimmed with lace, with a lace veil thrown back and falling to the ground. She wore a cloak of black satin, lined with black taffetas and trimmed with sable, with a long train and sleeves reaching to her feet. The buttons were of jet, surrounded with pearls, her collar of the Italian style, Her doublet was of figured black satin, and underneath she wore stays laced behind in crimson satin edged with velvet of the same color. A gold cross hung on a gold chain from her neck, and 2 rosaries at her girdle. Thus she entered the great hall where the scaffold was erected. It was a platform 12 feet wide, raised about 2 feet from the floor, surrounded with barriers and covered with a black serge, and on it were a chair, a cushion to kneel on, and the fatal block covered in black. As Mary Stuart mounted the steps and set foot on the platform, the executioner stepped by her side, and asking forgiveness for the act he was about to perform, kneeled, hiding behind him the axe. Mary, however, saw it, and cried, "I would rather have been beheaded in the French way, with a sword." "It is not my fault, madam," said the executioner, "that this last wish of your majesty cannot be fulfilled. But not having been instructed to bring a sword, I am obliged to use the axe. Will that prevent, then, your pardoning me?" "I pardon you," said Mary, "and in proof, here is my hand to kiss." Oh, the royals. So out of touch. The executioner put his lips to her hand, rose, and approached the chair. Mary sat down, and the Earls of Kent and Shrewsbury, standing on her left, the sheriff and his officers in front of her, Sir Amos Paulet behind, and outside the barriers the lords, knights, and gentlemen, numbering nearly 250. Robert Beale, for the second time, read the death warrant. I'm going to pause, because I have cotton mouth. Mary Stuart listened, without seeming to pay much attention. Then, when Beale, having concluded, cried with a loud voice, "God save Queen Elizabeth!" to which, it is recorded, no one made response. Mary made the sign of the cross and said, "My lords, I am a queen-born sovereign, princess, and not subject to law, a near relative of the Queen of England and her rightful heir. For a long time I have been a prisoner in this country, and have suffered much tribulation and evils that no one had a right to inflict. And now, to crown all, I am to lose my life. My lords, bear witness that I die in the Catholic faith, thanking God for letting me die for his holy cause, and protesting, today as every day, in public as in private, that I have never plotted, consented to, nor desired the death of the Queen of England, nor anything against her person, for that, on the contrary, I have always loved her, and have always offered her good and reasonable conditions to put an end to the troubles of the kingdom and deliver me from my captivity, without my having ever been honored with a reply from her. And all this, my lords, you well know. Finally, my enemies have attained their end, which was to put me to death. I do not pardon them, less for it than I pardon all those who have conspired against me. After my death, the authors of it will be known, but I die without accusing anyone, for fear God should hear and avenge me. Oh, wow. God might hear and avenge you. Upon this, whether he was afraid that such an address by a queen should influence the assemblage, or whether he thought that there was already too much delay, the Dean of Peterborough placed himself in front of Mary, and leaning on the barrier said, "Madam, my honored mistress has commanded me to come to you." Before he could proceed any further, Mary interrupted him abruptly, spoke, "Mr. Dean, I have nothing to do with you. I do not wish to hear you, and beg you to withdraw." Then the Earl of Kent asked her if she had any confession to make, to which she replied that not being guilty to confess would be to make of her a liar. "Then, madam," said the Earl, "prepare." Mary Stuart arose, and as the executioner advanced towards her to assist her to disrobe, said, "Allow me. I know how to do it better than you, and am not accustomed to undress before so many spectators, nor to be served by such valets." I think it may be valets. Then she began to undress, and taking the gold cross from her neck, she asked permission of the executioner to give it to Jeanine Kennedy, but the executioner snatched it from her hands. "It is my right," he exclaimed. Mary did not appear to be moved by this act of brutality. She went on removing her garments until she was simply in her petticoat. Then she sat down, and Jeanine Kennedy bound her eyes with the gold-embroidered handkerchief, upon which the earls, lords, and gentlemen looked with surprise. It not being the custom in England, as she thought, she was to be beheaded in the French way, seated in the chair. She held herself upright, motionless, with her neck stiffened for the executioner, who, not knowing how to proceed, was standing axe in hand. At length he laid his hand on the Queen's head, and drawing her forward, made her fall on her knees. She then understood what was required of her, and feeling for the block with her hands, which still held her crucifix. I thought the executioner had taken her crucifix. Somebody forgot something. She laid her neck upon it. The executioner raised his axe and struck, but the blow was too high and pierced the skull, he struck again, but it required the third attempt to completely sever the head from the body. The executioner held it up so all could see, exclaiming, "God save Queen Elizabeth!" "So perish all her Majesty's enemies," responded the Dean of Peterborough. The servants of Mary Stuart were now allowed to go upon the scaffold, and Jeanine Kennedy, remembering a little dog that had accompanied his mistress, looked for him, but could not find him. At that moment, as the executioner was untying the Queen's garters, he saw the poor animal which had hidden in her petticoat. Soon after, the body of Mary Stuart was left with none present but the executioner. Brantome relates that something infamous took place there. Ooh. Mary Stuart was buried in the cathedral at Peterborough, built by one of the Saxon kings. Her funeral sermon was preached by a Protestant bishop, who offered no hope for her Catholic soul. Editor's notes. The story of Mary Stuart of Scotland, written by Dumas, discloses the fierce religious hatreds of the time. It also discloses the age which kings and queens could do no crime in the sight of the law. Whatever may be said of the character of Mary Stuart, her murderers and immoralities, the reader, if versed in history, realizes that the same or even more can be said of her cousin, Elizabeth of England. It was a period when killing for political or religious or even personal motives was considered right when done by the ruling class. The question arises, is not this still a recognized prerogative of the rulers? Is not war a right that they still maintain? Therefore, when reading of the cruel and superstitious times of Mary Stuart and Elizabeth Tudor, it is well to contemplate the cruelties and superstitions still among us. The truth of the accusation made by Mary Stuart that she was executed especially on account of her religious faith is testified to by the impartial history of the time. Little did Elizabeth and her allies care for the death of Darnley. It was the fear that a Catholic might again mount the throne of England that caused the death of Mary. Just as the fear that a Protestant might come into power caused Protestants to be put to death during the years of religious wars. How far these warring creeds, as well as the warring nations, are from the simple gospel of Christ, not only in the days when the story of Mary Stuart is laid, but even at this time, is left for the reader to judge. And that is the end of Little Blue Book number 169. Yeah, number 69, not 169. Number 69, Life of Mary, Queen of Scots, written by Alexander Dumas. Thanks for listening, and join me in the next Little Blue Book.